Hello, everyone. Welcome to this fourth session of Beyond Bohm, Imagination, Creativity, and Dialogue. I'm James P. Barbary, Associate Program Director here at the Power Center, and I will be your host for today. As a host, I'm here to help you throughout the call, so any issues, please let me know in the chat. Let me just very briefly go through a couple of the guidelines for this call. Firstly, if you could please mute your microphone to avoid any background noise, but we do invite you to turn on your camera, as it's always nice to see everyone during the call. The chat, as usual, will be closed during the initial discussion and presentations, but will be opened up during Q&A. So feel free to share your ideas, thoughts, or additional material during this time. And of course, you can always ask questions in the chat for me to read out. Finally, the session is recorded for archival purposes and for you all. The recording should be available in a few days. You should receive a link via email. So yes, so this is the part two of yesterday's session. We're joined again by the panel composed of Steve Breaux, Bulla-Richards, Skye Hoorne, and Hester Reeve. We have a presentation today by Skye Hoorne, who holds a MS in Computer Science from Vrije University, Brussels, and attended LUCA School of Arts in Ghent. She is a graphic artist and creator of comic strips, and is currently focused on ceramic sculptures, drawings, and paintings. Skye attempts to make incidental works of art in which the viewer is invited to step into the subject by appealing to their generative imagination and subtle participation. This approach involves free play with cliches, perspectives, and polarities. Skye is a contributor to the forthcoming Holoflux Codex, Form, Movement, Vision, inspired by David Bohm. Today, we also have a presentation by Hester Reeve, who is a reader in fine art at Sheffield Hallam University in the UK. Her practice encompasses live art, drawing, sculpture, poetry, philosophy, and dialogue, as set out by David Bohm. Hester's work has also been shown internationally, including at former Randolph Street Gallery, Chicago, Live Biennale Vancouver, BONE Performance Festival in Switzerland, Tate Britain, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, Halle G Vienna, and most recently, Nairok Sculpture Park in South Africa. Hester is also a contributor to the Holoflux Codex by Pair Publishing. The panel is also composed of Steve Breaux, who's a retired professor of visual arts at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette, where he taught art and the computer, conceptual and formal development, advanced drawing, and 2D design. For 25 years, he has worked both as a solo artist and in collaboration with his wife and partner, Kathy Reed, in a variety of media, including processes art, printmaking, computer animation and video, photography, and painting. His work has been accepted regionally, nationally, and internationally for inclusion in galleries, museums, catalogs, and exhibitions. In 2015, Steve was invited to present his abstract Waking Space, the Emerging Art Object, Quantum Theory, and Algorithmic Art at the Towards a Science of Consciousness conference in Helsinki, Finland. We're also joined by Bulla-Richards, who is an architectural and landscape designer, public artist, and educator. As a lecturer in the Landscape Architecture and Urbanism graduate program at the University of Southern California, she leads a design studio that addresses adapting our constructed world to shifting natural and social cultural forces. As the creative director of Watershed Progressive, Asia is responsible for managing and designing landscape projects and educational programs throughout California. We've heard some of them yesterday. These projects explore how we can transform monolithic systems into resilient ecological cycles that re-enchant everyday experience and promote alternative cultural practices. Asia is also a contributor to Holoflux Codex. And finally, we have Lee Nicol, chair of this event and organizer. He is a freelance writer and editor. His latest works are entering Bohm's Holoflux, and as editor, the forthcoming Holoflux Codex, Form, Movement, Vision, inspired by David Bohm. He was a longtime friend and collaborator of David Bohm and is editor of Bohm's On Dialogue, The Essential David Bohm, and On Creativity. Lee sits on the advisory committee at the Power Center, the advisory council of the Indigenous Educational Institute, and is a member of the founding circle of the Native American Academy. He lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico with his wife, Eva Casey. This session, like yesterday, the panel will discuss the processes of creation. And with that, I'll pass it over to the chair, Lee. Welcome.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Eleanor. Thank you everyone for showing up today and yesterday. Before we begin, just a couple of points. One, especially for those of you that may be new to the PARI programs, I just want to point out that James and Eleanor normally are in two different places when we do these sessions. And also to point out that James and Eleanor are mother and son, which some of you may not know. But today and yesterday, Eleanor is in London and James and Eleanor are together. I think for me, at least, having done many of these programs, that's a first, and it's a delight to see and have them together as we do these programs. One other thing, it could be many other things, but I'll limit it to one. After our session yesterday and through the night, waking up in the middle of the night, there were so many things that were brought out that we could take dozens of them and make an entire session out of so many of the things that were walked through and discussed and shared with us yesterday. But there's one that really stuck with me, and I just want to very briefly speak to that. It was when, after Steve had presented, and Hester asked him something to the effect of, what do you do when things go wrong with regard to his artwork? And Steve said, well, things are always going wrong. And it seems so simple and so straightforward, and in one way it is. But in another way, it has so many layers, this thing, things are always going wrong. So one piece of it, excuse me, it links us back to Tim Ingold. And one of the things that Tim talks about at length in his book is walking, the simple act of walking, that in subtle ways, every time we take a step, we're slightly losing our balance and then having to reorient. And, you know, that's largely unconscious for us now. But that's another version of, in a sense, things are always going wrong, but we're always reorienting and readjusting and shifting and changing to adapt to these new conditions, which may be very visible or they may be invisible, but we're always doing that. And I think this is something that Bohm pointed us to in life in general, that in some sense, things are always going wrong. And it's not a bad thing. They're always coming out of order. They're always moving in a fluxing kind of way. And yet we're always adjusting and adapting and finding our way back into a certain kind of temporary balance. So I just wanted to thank Hester and Steve for bringing out that apparently simple, but really to me very profound and subtle point. Okay, with that, I will hand it right over to Sky to get us started today.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Hi, everyone. Glad you could join us on this hot summer day. Well, if you're in Europe, that is. We have a lot to go through, so I suggest we dive straight into my presentation. There we go. Now, what's on the menu? First, we'll be talking a bit about photography and photographic gaze and how it affects consciousness and how we look at the world. Next, I will show you 3 pieces of art. I will try to explore, we'll explore what's in common between them, despite them being quite different. Then this will bring us to the topic of incendents, which you have probably heard about, but haven't really got a clear idea of. And lastly, I'll be talking about generative imagination, which is linked to the concept of generative order, which many of you are already familiar with, I guess. Okay, photography. So the camera, or the paralyzed cyclops, as David Hockney likes to call it, has been dominating our culture for quite a long time. It has really crept into the way we take in the world, and well, it does have some detrimental effects. But just to recap, what happens when you take a picture, what you're actually doing is you're capturing the light that is being reflected off of a number of surfaces in a limited space in a fraction of time, and that's it. There's no movement, and well, it's quite fragmented, and it induces distance. To give you a more clear example of this, let me just, because it's already enough presentation. So most of you are familiar with people taking photographs when you're at a concert, for example. And we all know it's quite a different experience of just enjoying the performance and hearing what's happening, just being in it. And looking through a mobile screen, it just creates this awful lot of distance. And actually, this is also what is happening in the way we're looking at the world. Just because we're using mobiles all the time, we're looking at screens, and we are, most of the time, we're no longer participating in our surroundings. We're more taking it in like a camera, and well, that's quite a pity. And so, of course, there's still a lot of artists that make non-photographic arts. They're definitely there, but they're, well, I won't say they're in a minority, but maybe they are. And on top of it, well, what is most, well, what's worst of it is that most people view a photograph as ultimate reality. So even if you show them a painting or a picture, they'll say, oh, this is less relevant. I have a picture of this. This is what it's actually like. And this is what I try to counter with my arts, and what I will try to show on the more philosophical side. So I'll return to the presentation. Sorry about this. There we go. So just to give you one more example, this is a simple photo collage I made just to show you how we actually look at something. When you look at a vase of flowers, it's not as if you take one snapshot of what you're looking at. No, normally you move around a little bit and you take in multiple perspectives, and it gets stitched together in a consciousness. So this is much more what actually happens. And maybe this is also not so straightforward, but I used ellipses because human perception, our visual fields, is more like an ellipse, and it's not a rectangle. This is also something we're not used to seeing, because we all think the rectangle is it. Because I'm now seeing all of you in rectangles. But the way my eyes and my consciousness is working is different. Moving on to the arts. So I'll be showing you a comic strip page, a sculpture, and a painting that is still in progress. And we'll start with clay sculpture. Now, I won't go too much into the meaning of what I'm making, but here I need to say that this one was inspired by Rio Soma, which is Lee's project, which I've been part of. And I definitely need to thank Lee for the inspiration and show me a way of directing and applying my imagination in a different way and more consciously. It's helped me a lot and given me new directions to make artwork. So what you're looking at is actually what I try to do is I try to sculpt an outer appearance of the figure, and I also try to bring out the inner physicality, I mean, the inner experience. So how do I do this? So when I'm starting, I manipulate the clay. I'm also looking at what it looks like, how the light falls on it, if it comes out okay, and I continue manipulating. At the same time, I'm also aware of my inner body experience, and I try to translate it into the piece of art. So I try to bring it out to give it more presence. It's not as if, well, sort of become one with what I'm making in a sense. And of course, throughout all this, there's a lot of creativity at play. I might make a sketch beforehand and have a vague idea where it's going, but in the end, I never know how it will end up. So there's the hands that are playing, there's the hearts, and there's also thoughts that are being put into the piece. So here you can see a close up. So the little holes to induce movement in the figure are they came about quite intuitively, just in one go. I just applied them. So it's intuition, but then there's also thought, because I put some attention to the heart center and the dantian for those who are familiar with this. So it's not only the invisible stuff. I also try to inject or show more explicit features. And then you can see two more pictures from different angles of the same piece. And here you can see it while it was still drying, because this is white clay, which is gray at first, and then you need to bake it to become, well, solid and have this this white color. Perhaps I should mention a few things about imagination. So in imagination, and Lee also pointed this out on the forum on Sutra, the body is always present to some degree, but of course this can vary, well, greatly. It can be almost absent. You can make very mental art objects. You can go, well, very much body oriented in an embodied way, and this is, well, certainly where I'm going since recently. There's always been the case, but even more right now than it ever was. I should also mention that, well, when we speak of the body, it can be emotions. That's also part of a body experience. Other movements, interoception, so everything that's going on inside the body. Yeah, well, you get the idea. Moving on, go to a bit lighter subject. It's a comic strip page of my Winds and Clouds series. I will just show you some close-ups so you can take in the story. I'll just say it always starts with the context. So here it's a city, and I'll just let you read the whole thing. I don't think the guy will do this again anytime soon. So again, moving to how this is being made. Actually, this is also very intuitively what I'm actually doing when I'm making this, when I'm drawing this first in pencil, then in ink. I try to act out the actions and the emotions of the characters on paper. So I might use a photograph here and there. I used one for the cityscape, but mostly it comes from imagination. I really try to bring out, and I might use a mirror from time to time, but it's really, yeah. And on a good day, it's magic, and on the well, there are also other days things go wrong all the time, as we were just talking about. But yeah, sometimes it's pure magic. I can't really tell how I do it. It's, yeah. And so also the effect I'm trying to get with all this is I try to get you, the viewer, to participate visually, emotionally, and intellectually to get this inner dialogue going. So on one hand, you have the lively pictures, and then you also have the content, which contains cliches, but also polarities and contradictions and conflicts. So, well, sometimes you end up with more questions than answers, and that's what I try to hint at. Then the third piece. So this is actually my first oil painting, which is still not finished. I tried to get it finished in time, but yeah, there was two things getting in the way. But I think, well, you get an idea of where I'm heading at. So if you think back about photography, this is far from linear perspective. It's impossible to see this in real life, but still I try to convey something that feels real. I try to convey what it feels like to be in the landscape, to feel the sun, and to have this feeling of wideness. You might see that the horizon is not a straight line; it's slightly bent. To give, well, if you look at the landscape, you also move your head in a slightly bent way. So it's also to give that the same feeling. I'm still trying to find ways to make it all work. This might change over time, but I think it's more or less, well, you see the form. You might also see on the left-hand side, there's some geese flying over. Well, you see the outline, but in real life, they will be much farther away if you took a picture. But I try to bring them in closer to have this feeling of them being there. And also when you happen to see, or mostly you hear them, and when you hear them fly over, they really feel close to you. And I try to visually translate this on the canvas, the auditory experience. So this was the preliminary drawing I made a long while ago. Yeah, it's a bit, well, there's more movements perhaps, which will probably also be added to the painting. But you see the geese are much simpler, much more realistic in a certain sense. Maybe people will say, isn't this just an impressionist painting, or is this expressionist? In a certain sense it is, but then again, what I try to do, and actually I am aware of what is happening before during the impression, and I really try to regenerate the feeling of being on the land and being there. So I would rather say it's pre-impressionism or pre-expressionism. It really tries to be one step ahead of what happens then. Of course, this is just my first painting. We'll see how all this evolves, but this is the feeling I have right now. And now we come to a bit of philosophy. So in these 3 pieces you just saw, well, what you might have, felt is, what I try to do is I try to have this subject-object duality fall away in a certain sense, and to really draw you into the depiction or the sculpture, and just to connect with it and participate with what you're seeing, what you're sensing. And this quality, I call it incendence. Here's the definition. So incendence is the quality or process of climbing into the world, into nature, both inward and outward, into the full experience, towards full wholehearted participation. Now, this is opposed to transcendence, which well, all of us are familiar with, which for me has much more to do with moving beyond or surmounting to a higher atmospheres and leaving the physical behind in a certain sense. I know, and for some people this might not ring totally true, but in most contexts and most texts, it is like that. The physical is left aside. And then, of course, well, when we're talking about incidental art, it's art that possesses this quality, and which also attempts, in fact, to trigger and alter generative imagination, which we'll talk about in a minute. Well, which you can also call creative perception. I should also mention, I call this incendence, but this quality has existed for ages. For me, you can see it throughout art history, from the Venus of Willendorf to, well, there's so many examples. This is nothing new. I just try to give more relevance to this quality in art, because I think it gets overlooked quite often. Maybe it becomes more clear if I translate this in a more Bohm-friendly term. So incendence can also be seen as participating wholly with the implicate and the explicit orders of the present active context. So if you compare this to transcendence, transcendence would be, well, almost entirely focused on the implicates, much less on the explicates. Or in more poetic terms, you could say that incendence is participation with the wilderness in flux, both the visible and the invisible, the known and the unknown, the subtle and the manifest, and it's not a retreat, not at all. So, just a little break from the presentation. So we've seen that imagination plays a big role in what I'm making, but of course all artists need to use their imagination. What comes out in my case is the use of the body, I think. And this probably originates from my childhood, where ever since I was a toddler, I had these bouts of nausea, which came from an undiagnosed illness. And yeah, it kept being there until my late 30s. It's now under control. It was my pancreas, which is not working well. But what was happening with me when I was young, I also had a very rich fantasy. I devoured European comic strips. I read books. I watched television. I also lived in a fantasy world from time to time, but I kept flip-flopping between the physical and this very mental realm. And I think most people, they tend to reside on one side of the spectrum. They're much more down to earth, or they're much more high in the clouds. And for me, I really kept bouncing between those extremes. And well, luckily over time, they got more integrated. And I think this also comes out in what I make with my artwork. So Yeah, time for some more presentation. Yeah, there's one thing I need to mention. So I'm not sure how many of you are, well, there's an underlying assumption or this mainstream view that imagination is this extra feature of consciousness, which is apart from perception. Now I propose, well, it's more than a proposal, it's my view, and that is that imagination actually helps to shape perception and reality. And this is not something I've been fantasizing. This is backed by brain science, in fact. So the metaphysics you're applying, the thoughts you have about the world, your ideas actually help shape how you take in and perceive the world. There's really this mixture going on. You can't separate the two. So this is really important to bring out. Maybe for most of you this is straightforward, but I just want to mention this just to be sure. And so now we get even, well, we're very close to David Bohm's theory. So in Science, Order and Creativity by David Bohm and David Peets, they are talking about generative order. They talk about it a lot, in fact. I think there's 4 chapters in total where they discuss this. And just to refresh your memory, this generative order or creative order is, I'm just quoting now from page 152, is concerned with a deeper and more inward order out of which the manifest form of things can emerge creatively. So, and maybe to make you help you remember, so the implicate order, in fact, is seen as a special case of the generative order. So it's seen as something quite important. And they go on discussing this, the importance in nature, in society, in art as well. Yeah, if you haven't read it, go read it. It's I find it's a very important book and concept. The thing with the book is, imagination is talked about on 2 pages, and for the rest it's implied. And they talk about creative perception most of the time when they speak about perceiving the generative order. But I would like to propose that you actually need generative imagination to unfold the generative order. And perhaps it seems like a simple step, but it really helps to, well, to bring out certain things. And I should also mention that, yeah, awareness plays a big part in all of this. It's really awareness that will determine how free and how deep imagination and creativity can run, in fact. And I tried to make a more comprehensible diagram, but in the end, well, I'm leaving you with this graph down below. So what I'm trying to say with this is you can have a very explicit imagination, which would mean you take in the world, you look at the world as you were taking photographs, just static pictures of things that you're collecting with no real connection between them. Or you can move more upstream in consciousness, more toward the generative order, where this quality of wholeness will come about, and you will see or perhaps intuit or feel that there's this connection between everything you're experiencing. And well, this can go a long way, but well, you get the idea. This is what I'm trying to say. And perhaps also for those familiar with Goethean observation is also very much making use of generative imagination. It's the same thing. Okay. And now, for me, for other artists, generative imagination means that, well, there's more freedom to create. In my case, I can really go very wide with the styles I'm applying. There's no real fixed style that I'm sticking to. But this is just, well, this is of lesser importance compared to the next slide. What I try to say there is actually generative imagination is the potential all of us possess. We all have it. When you talk to little children, they're always looking at the world afresh and sharing their experiences. And sometimes they can make us, well, see it too and bring it out. So I would just invite you all to, well, just enjoy seeing more afresh. Become a child again from time to time. And for those of you who are interested in more of my artwork and, well, more explanation on the philosophy behind all this, there's more on my website, so you can see it here. And just thank you for listening and following all this explanation. And, well, looking forward to your questions.
Sky, thank you so much. As we were saying about Asia's work and Steve's work yesterday, there are so many things you brought out that we can look at carefully. So we'll do our best today to bring some of that out. And I would like to invite Asia to get us started today in having a look at what Sky has shared with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sky. That was wonderful. So I wanted to ask about this sense of climbing into the world in connection to imagination, because I think when you described the comic strip and kind of almost climbing into the page and the characters and feeling what they're feeling, that really opened up something for me in your process. But of course, this sense of climbing into the world can almost, yeah, in some sense implies that we're going deeper into, you know, what is real, what exists, which might to some feel different than imagination, or at least in the sense of fantasy that you were describing, you know, as a child. And so I just wanted to ask you to bring out a little bit more of how imagination for you supports this climbing deeper into the world.
Well, actually, yeah, it's subtle, but maybe I should start with this example. I became a huge fan of David Hockney, and when you look at his more recent paintings of landscapes, sometimes his way of painting a tree or a plant that is flowering, you look at the picture and then you go outside and you just look at the world differently. And so imagination in this case, what I try to say is it's trying to bring out or to observe and bring out aspects that you hadn't seen before. And maybe, so another way, so recently I've been sitting in the field here nearby, and just there was wind. And as most of you know, if you look, most paintings have been made, it's never raining, it's never windy. It's also quite static most of the time. And I was just sitting there and trying to take in the movements, the rhythm of the plants moving, the leaves, and figuring out or imagining a way to put this on paper or on canvas. And I still need to get out and do this more often and just, well, train myself. But you see, it's, yeah, that's imagination going on, but it's a combination. It's the combination of perception and imagining something deeper that I'm in contact with, but I can't really, sometimes you can't directly see it. You have to wait it out and become familiar with it, and then it will come out, it will unfold. Yeah, don't know if that's well, a good answer to your question.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky and Asia. Hester, would you carry us forward?
You're muted.
Maybe just as well, because I found myself singing your name. Because I think you're an artwork. I mean, every human being is artistic and every human being is an artwork. But I can't help wanting to, lucky enough to know you through the Holoflux group. There is something about you yourself and how you think, how you dress, how you are in your beautiful space that I find deeply stirring. So that needs to be said. That's not a question, forgive me for that, but I can't help say that. And I love the way, of course I would with my interest in philosophy, I love the way you needed a word. And I think I love that word in sentence. I mean, I have a problem with words, I'm not very good with them, but that word does something itself. So in a way, that word stirs me as much as a painting might. So thank you. And then I just wanted to ask you if you'd seen the recent images brought back by the James Webb Telescope. So we have, yeah, it's sort of really extraordinary in a way. And of course, we know that human beings are involved in having to translate from numbers and sort of coded into the visuals we see, but it's nonetheless, it's touched. It's our apparatus of perception has touched it. And it makes me wonder, yeah, I want to know what you think about those images. Does it trap us in our explicit imagination? Or is there something that stirs the generative imagination in all of us? Not because the generative is pictured, I don't think it can be. And if you don't understand the question, because I can be a bit curly-whirly, then what do you think about those images and what do they do to you?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm a bit embarrassed by all what you're saying. Yeah, the telescope pictures, of course, yeah. For me, that's a whole different thing, that there's no perspective going on because it's so distant, and you're looking, in fact, well, it's a flat surface. Of course, it's not flat back there, but it's brought back close to us. There, in fact, you have, well, it's paradoxical, but there you have something very distant that's brought closer to us. And I was just saying more or less the opposite. So I find them very moving, and yeah, they're beautiful. They're really beautiful. Of course, I don't know to what extent they well, like you were saying, they add color. Well, there's all these algorithms going on to give it the right color, but still, yeah, I find it amazing. And I'm not saying all photography should go, and I never said that. I like to take photographs as well, but we just need to counter it a little bit and just not have it as the ultimate reality. I think that's silly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. Thank you, Hester. Steve, do you have a comment or a question for Sky?
Sure. I mean, I just want to thank you for a wonderful, sensitive presentation. And there's one question I'd love to ask, and it's about Bohm stating how photography, because it fits into what you're saying, how photography has its role in science and how it's changed science in a way that photography and images almost have this role of deciding what is real. That one's a long question. I'm going to ask you a little bit different question. When you talk about your sculpture, you talk about how you go into it and you start about, and you may start one spot, you're not sure where it's going to go, etc. And I'm curious about how that's different with your comic book cells, which to me, maybe not to you, would imply some kind of thinking ahead and organization, more of an organized way to approach. So those are like two very different kinds of approaches. And if you could just talk about that, I'd find that very interesting.
Yeah, it is different. Yeah, it's very different. There are quite different mediums, and yeah, of course, when you're making a comic strip, usually what you do is it can depend. Sometimes you're more free, but I try to stick to this overall plan to have the context and then 4 panels usually, sometimes more, but everything has to fit into that, and the text cannot be too large. There's a lot of constraints, you're right, and you really have to plan ahead and work with the constraints, which is a challenge, but then also you can start playing with it. And clay is just, it also depends which clay you're using, but sometimes if you use very flexible clay, you push on one side and it moves, the whole thing moves and changes. Of course, I'm doing this mixture. I'm making, I talk about sculpture. So what I do in the beginning, I mold it a bit and I bring out the sort of general form. And then at some point I start taking off pieces of clay, like a sculptor would do. But the process, to really find what's the same, it goes back to the generative part of the whole process. But the way it's executed and done is so, it is really different, and I find it's complementary. It was thanks to my girlfriend who took me to some ceramics classes. It's just, and it's way more physical, and it can bring you in a much more childlike state. Well, also when you're drawing, but for me, drawing, it has all these connotations. I know what something should look like, and I'm comparing it to this and to that, and it should look like this. And when I'm making a sculpture, it's much more free. And I would say to all of you, try it. It's really great to work with clay, and very physical.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sky and Steve. Just one quick question for me, Sky. I love your term generative imagination. I think it takes some critical aspects of David Bohm's work and fuses them in a very helpful way. And I would just like to ask you if you can say anything about, for you, what it feels like to be in that generative imagination. Is there a way to talk about even a little bit what the experience is like as compared to our daily moving around and practical do this and do that? Can you say a little bit about the feeling of being in generative imagination?
That's a hard one, but at the same time, maybe it isn't. Well, when I compare this to the Riosoma experiments and to the attunement to nature, it's more or less the same. Of course, in this, for me, it's quite the same. There's a difference when I start when there's this intention of making something. Of course, then there's a certain pressure, but not too much. I can also be in a state of just waiting it out and then seeing what happens. I think this also, I read about, I really would like to get more into the timeless order as well, and the timelessness, because this is also something that's quite important, I think. So yeah, I think to a certain extent, time can tend to fall away in that experience, and it's just yeah, a general feeling of well, of potentiality and things that can go a lot of different ways. And yeah, I think for some people it may be overwhelming. I've heard some people say, I made some recent sketches, they were kind of terrified with what I'm doing. Maybe that is coming out. Maybe you have to be adjusted a bit to the movement going on, but because maybe that's it. There's a lot of movements. And yeah, it's a very pleasant space to be in.
What I hear you saying is pleasant and terrifying, potentially both. So thank you for that, Sky. I'd like now to invite comments or questions from our larger group of participants today. James, would you get us going with that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sky, for your presentation. It's been really interesting and wonderful. Secondly, I am just opening the chat at the moment, so feel free to ask your question in the chat and I can read it out for you. And if you want to make a question or contribution, if you can please use the raise your hand function, which is under reactions at the bottom of your screen. Don't see any hands up just yet. Oh, we have Beth. Or you're just muted at the moment.
I'm a little bit more focused today, which is a good thing. Let me put my video back on. I was really struck, first of all, I love ascendants. I am familiar with Barry, but I was not familiar with that term, and I think it's quite lovely. And I'm going to look into that further. I guess I want to just say that as a photographer, I was really struck. I'm always struck by how people talk about photography, especially now that in the age of everybody taking a million digital snapshots, of what we used to call snapshots. I confess I still shoot film. I have to say that there is a kind of idea that photography represents the real, but I think that's a cultural idea. And I just want to run this by you and see what you think. Because for me, photography is not at all about linear perspective. Photography is about light. And that brings us back to Tim Ingold's writing on light in that book, which I don't think we discussed, and to other qualities of light and its presencing and for us and with us. And so when I and other photographers who mentored me and others know about photography is it brings one present with, not standing outside of, but present with, and that all of that process is such a collaborative process with, and I'm not talking about shooting shots in studio, I guess. When I go out on the land, and I'm aware that what I'm doing is working with the genius loci of place with that and the presence of light. So that sort of comes back to, for me, what the process of art is. And then the artifacts that come from that process in the world, which I think do have the capacity to bring us present in that particular way that I think you call ascendance. And it was reminding me of James Hillman, the psychologist's writing on the aesthetic, where he speaks about the aesthetic aha, which is this sort of moment, I think I mentioned it briefly yesterday, when we are brought present by something that captures us right there in that endless moment that goes forever. So I'm just wondering what you think about, I guess I'm going to stop there because I'll give you too many things to think about. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. You're right. Actually, the incendence was already used, I think 10 years ago by somebody else, an ecologist, priest. Yeah. But I didn't know, but I looked it up, and then I saw he had already this definition, and it really matched quite close to what I was trying to say. And then, well, I also mentioned him on my website. It's also, well, he's an important, well, he's an interesting thinker. To go to your question, I see what you're saying, and I'm not saying that an incidental picture or photograph is impossible. On the contrary, well, you can have very moving and very, well, you can have photographs that actually, yeah, remove distance and bring lights to a subject, or to well, to a certain space or whatever, and bring out aspects that you otherwise wouldn't see, even with the eye. So yeah, but still, I think, well, in our culture, it's quite rare. You don't see that too often. But it's certainly, I really enjoyed this type of photograph that you're describing. It's there should definitely be made more of that. No question about it. And even, well, photographs have their place, and this type of photography that you're talking about, it's also great. But yeah, it's not ultimate reality. Well, nothing is. It's just another perspective. Well, that's what I'm trying to say. Just to have this more a variety and more perspectives that are complementing each other to get to a better understanding of our world.
Thank you, Sky and Beth. James, do we have another participant?
Yes, well, there's actually an interesting question in the chat that I'd like to read out. That comes from Therese. Her question is about how playing with the holoflux has changed your practice, or any of our panelists today. You're also skilled at your art, and I think big thoughts about philosophical concepts. How has playing with the holoflux changed how you approach your work? And in particular, how do you experience the holoflux in your body?
That's a big question, but it has been answered already a little bit in my answer to Lee, because Riosoma, well, if that's what's being if that is the meaning of playing with holoflux, because yeah, it's a bit strange playing with holoflux. Holoflux it's here. It's always here. So you can imagine into it, but you can actually, well, get more close to it by practicing Riosoma. There are other ways to experience it. Yeah, and how this, well, as I was saying, it can be terrifying. It can be, well, for me, it's mostly joyful, and it's just yeah, all the movements and the possibilities that arise. It's just this creative, well, this creative potential that's. But maybe I'm too focused on that. Maybe I'm quite sure there are other aspects that I could experience and look into, because it's so vast, and it will be different for every one of us. So maybe, well, I take let's take it to the other panelists.
So I just had a follow-up on that, which comes from me. I'm taking the liberty. How about as holoflux, well, playing with the holoflux affected your work, whether it was visually or practically, or even just the method of working with your artwork? Has it changed anything there in a more practical sense?
Well, certainly the combining, or the bringing out of the feeling, the bodily feeling, the embodiment is much more prominent in what I'm making. It used to be, it was already there. Especially, I also always try to make lively drawings, but it actually, yeah, there came this moment where I made the click or the link to bring out my own experience and bring that out, and that was really crucial, a crucial step to take. And yeah, I think once you make the step, and well, you just become familiar with it, and it keeps, well, you keep on doing it and using it and applying it. And yeah, right now it's hard for me to say to what extent that it's, well, in everything that I'm making right now, I can see a progress in what I'm doing, but can I all ascribe this to the holoflux play? Maybe. It's, of course, there's also my progress, well, by working at my skills. It's difficult, but I would just say, yeah, there's more movement, and I think there's more presence to what I'm making than there was before. The images have become stronger. Yeah, don't know if that's clarifying.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. James, I think we can do one more. If we have a live comment, a live person, that would be great. And if not, one more chat.
Of course, we have Rob with his hand up.
Oh, hello. Really enjoyed your presentation. It brings out something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and this is this relationship between generative imagination and the generative order, and it reminds me of something, and I hope I have this story right. David Shrum was talking in an earlier workshop about how when he was very young, he had one eye that worked very well, and the other eye, he couldn't focus, and he couldn't get these objects. So what he had to do is cover the good eye and really, really work hard on imagining what it was that the good eye could see. And it took him a long time, but he was able to actually correct a really serious visual problem by using imagination. And to me, that, is speaking to how powerful imagination is in organizing our reality. And I mean, just in a general sense, I think we're just on the cusp of realizing as how we are as human beings, and how we're really imagining our world into being. And whatever that is, because it can be anything, and it can be extremely destructive or good, but it's operating, and it's like it's indicating how powerful thought is. And so that's kind of like one direction, but the other direction is, creativity means to bring something into being from nothing. So no thing, right? So that means no thingness, but then, it comes through, and then there's thingness, whatever these creations are. So are those things that are coming through they're almost like they're pre-existent or something, and then we're just like a vessel or a conduit or whatever that explicates them. They were already there. So it doesn't really, it's not really a question, but I just appreciate your highlighting this generative imagination and generative order, because it's potent, and very relevant. And I think we got to get a grip on it as humans if we're going to get through what we got to get through here. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you. It's really funny because I'm friends with David Shrum, and this is actually the synopsis of the story you were talking about with the eye. and I'm working on a comic strip version of this.
Oh,
And it's been, well, I need to continue it, but it's it's in progress. I hope to have finished by the end of the year, so you might see a comic strip version of that. And yeah, you're right. It really it corresponds to what we've been talking about. So it's very relevant, his story. And as for, yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. And as to the predefined, yeah, maybe, of course, we all have these constraints. Our consciousness isn't, well, we're inside the culture. We're all, well, from very young on, we get familiar with all these structures in nature and also man-made. And perhaps, yes, the things we come up with, that we create, does it already exist? It's a good question. It brings us also back to the question of the timeless, and I don't really have an answer, but it's a very interesting question. But thank you.
sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Sky. Thank you, Rob. And thank you, everyone, for bringing really remarkable thoughts and insights and queries. So, Hester, whenever you're ready, here we go.
Okay, let me just share screen. Can that image be seen okay? Is that fine?
Yes, it's perfect, full screen.
Okay. If people don't mind, I'm going to read. I really believe in thinking and speaking in the present tense. But when I have to speak about my work, I find that very hard. It is important that artists talk about their work, but I just find it very difficult. So to make sure I'm a little bit clear, or clearer than usual, bear with me. This isn't so much a piece of work as an element of my practice. They are called trainers of transformation. And my practice, and I'm going to talk mainly about my practice. If I'm talking about process, creativity, and David Bohm, I'm not really talking about the content of any particular piece of work. I would be more talking about my creative practice as an artist thinker. So at base, that practice is about transformation, as in the transformative potential of life as a kind of medium, and of ourselves, and in particular, how we participate in that reality. Of course, trainers are fetish objects of high capitalism. But what I'm really trying to get at here, apart from confronting the material skin of the world I live in, is to get at a more strange, a primordial athleticism. There are candles inside, a mix of the daily muscular strength of transformation, working at it, being in training, but also something holy, which I don't use in a religious sense. In approaching art and philosophy, Deleuze and Guattari speak of an affective athleticism, which I'm rather taken by, indicating not physical hard labor so much as its inorganic double. And I quote, an athleticism of becoming that reveals only forces that are not its own. In this respect, artists are like philosophers. Both have seen something in life that is too much for anyone, man's non-human becoming. And I link that quote and that sentiment to Bohm's idea of participation, which is not as straightforward as, you know, I participate in something else or I'm part of the whole. There is something quite disturbing about participation if we really let ourselves be confronted by that idea, because there is something of the whole in each one of us. And if you really think about that, it's very disturbing. We're not brought up, our whole structures are not brought up to accommodate that. Sadly, they could be, but they're not. So it's disturbing in a good way. So yes, participation, or this notion of man's non-human becoming, is not about self-confirmation. And already people brought up the holoflux. Great questions. Thank you so much. As ever with Parry, the questions that people bring up and the contributions are so rich and important. And it's so hard to talk about the holoflux because we can't talk about it. I don't think we can play with it. I think it's impossible. I can't lick the bone marrow of my own bones, although I'm told if I did, I'd get an electric shock. That doesn't mean we shouldn't think about playing with it. That shouldn't mean we shouldn't work with it. So, and I think the athleticism, these trainers of transformation, you've got to somehow have a porosity to holoflux, whatever that means, and I just don't know. So, you know, you can try asking me that later, but I won't be able to give you an answer. Okay, but something about athleticism and exposure to existence. I'm not going to use too many quotes. I know sometimes that can be tiring, but I really, well, I sort of love most things David Bohm said, but here's one I particularly like. Given that a human being may be creative when his or her consciousness, oh, and now I can't, I'm going to just let you read that because I don't have this quote in my notes. So I just give you a few seconds to read that. Lee, is it visible enough for people to read?
Yes, I think so. It's fine.
And I think the key thing about the quote is this, the italics, you know, a better question, he says, is can we be free to participate in the creative totality at a level appropriate to our potential? I just think that's sort of what those trainers are sort of all about. So a kind of philosophical or existence related concern drives my practice as a whole. And I put quite a lot of time and effort into engaging with that. That implies reading and the kind of things we're engaging in today, of course. And that's linked to a part of a broader project about maintaining what I call astonished wonder, yet a deep involvement with being in existence. And certainly the work we've been doing in the holoflux group sort of links to that. Whether we're directly playing with holoflux, I don't know, but that's sort of part of it. And it's the question that Heidegger raises of why is there something rather than nothing? And I suppose I've been, I don't want to solve that question, but I want to live it in some sort of creative sense. And I find art, for me, is the way of doing that. At the same time, I don't think an artwork object, and here we see a sculpture, can actually do it. I'm not devaluing works of art. I think they're really important. But it's as if the art objects I make aid my living it and my understanding. They allow me to be intense. They allow me to express my own little bit of what I call freedom frenzy. But ultimately, I care far more about the art of life, and that's where other people might be involved. So here you can see this piece is called Burning to Speak, and it's not about trainers of transformation, but as with many of my works, I pop trainers of transformation on them. You might be able to see the microphones at the top of the scaffold poles, and the drawers are just about made out. And in these drawers, you can just see a close-up of one to the right. And most people didn't open them, but if you did want to open them, there's a text that runs throughout all the drawers. And it's an ancient text, a sentence from a work of Plato, which is when he addresses a group of students and challenges their non-willingness to seek wisdom from an oak tree. And he accuses them of rather wanting to seek wisdom from exclusively human source or information or human cultural conditions. So the burning to speak is about voicing, both voicing with world through matter, but also my own pre-subjective self, if that's at all possible, possibly not, but at least that the yearning is there, and it would be a burning necessarily, a bit like a meteorite landing through the atmosphere. And it's not really about anything I know, so to speak. So voice for me is not about information or communication. And so it's hard to talk about. And when I come to try and talk about my work, I do sort of strike a strange muteness that's at the heart of the actual making. And I don't know if that's because I'm very, very right-brained, to the point where it could almost become a disability. But the really wonderful thing about that is I feel like my brain has an emotional need to express itself. And when I say my brain, I don't mean my personality. I mean what I call the cosmic seed bud that I happen to be temporarily growing around. Maybe that's a strange way of putting it, but that's the way I'd put it. Okay, now I'll let you watch something. This image suggests physics. It's a beautiful word. It's an orrery, another word that seems to do something beyond the linguistic. And of course, we know that Bohm was a great physicist, but I've not chosen it because of its links to science, but because this is probably the best way I can open up a way of talking about my creative practice and my process. So I'm going to play a clip. You can just enjoy watching it. Now, this is where I try and come out of to a different window and don't do it very gracefully. I don't want to stop sharing. I have another window. Not there. Oh, right, I'm going to have to stop share and start again with that. Do forgive me. Oh dear. Now, can you what can you see? Can you see my Safari, Glyn? You might have to talk to me. Can you see my Safari page, or are you seeing me in the Zoom room?
Yeah, we can't see it.
Great, that's fine. I'll share. I couldn't tell. Here we go. We get there eventually. Oh, I'm so sorry. Why won't it show me what I want it to show?
It might work if you do it from that PowerPoint page, that was not fully open.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. I think I've now got there. Can you see that?
Yes.
Sorry about that, guys. I think it's worth the wait. Okay, we'll stop as it goes into Hollywood music backdrop mode. And let me just, that's the only video. You'll be glad to know there'll be no more technical shenanigans from this person. Yep, we'll go straight into, back to my friendly PowerPoint. Yes. Okay. So, I mean, I think it's quite clear what's going on there. It's like a circulatory system. And let me just go to, it's like a circulatory system, and every part has to be in movement, even though they move almost in with different qualities and at different speeds. Each one has its own internal kind of energy, and you know, it's a metaphor, and it needs, what's interesting is it does need a human being to start it. It's not human, but it needs a human being to start it. I love the little hand that winds it up, and if even one of those orbs doesn't work, then it, whatever it is, won't work. And I think of what Bohm said about a creative mind state and how necessary that was for creativity, but that he thought a creative mind state was increasingly rare, like very rare. And I'm not saying I managed to achieve it, I often don't, but this need for a creative mind state is foundational for my work as an artist. And I'm really not in this state as often as I want and need to be. And that's actually, you know, just the pressures of more what I call left brain work. And because once I get the handle going, it can take sometimes a day for all of the orbs to start going. And it quite literally feels like that in my head. And the sensation of that is a kind of, I call it, everything is purring. And then I can really work. I often have to work without this going in it, and it feels brutal and violent. This is how I like to work. And it's a kind of chaos. This is very graceful and a beautiful image, but it's actually quite chaotic. It's hard to really put my finger on any of it. And then I can talk about certain things, but the actual artwork sort of comes not pre-formed, but out of it. And I've done a little diagram just for the sake of this talk, where I've sort of named what potentially some of those orbs might be. And actually there's lots of orbs, and it doesn't help to really try and name them, but just to open up my practice. And I think what the most important thing is meaning. And I think my practice is one of meaning making, but less in terms of making sense and more in terms of Bohm's notion that actually meaning is a quality of reality. It's a quality of the wider universe. And it's not that my job is to grasp that meaning. I am meaning. I am a particle of meaning of that universe. Not to personalize it too much, but that it calls for an act of correspondence. At the same time, it asks me not to abandon my sight of being. So it's not really about my personality. And I think often people think that is with my work, because I often use my body. I'm almost 6 foot. I've got a very physical presence. So people want to sort of see that as about me. And it's not really that at all, but I can't not use myself in it. And I quite like in this diagram how, to some degree, you know, I'm there in the spindle, but I put meaning working up the spine. And whilst I've tried to just label certain elements, so one of them is the brain's emotional longing. Another one is philosophy. Another one is about poetic dwelling. Meaning is everywhere. And it's in the little orbs that then go around all the other orbs. And of course, hollow flux is just about everywhere and can't even be in the diagram. It's also zooming out. Meaning, of course, is not made, it's revealed. Bohm speaks about what is required. I mean, he talks about the possibility of non-verbal thinking, because I think making is also linked to thinking. Some artists don't like to think like that, and that's okay. But I think even when you're working with your hands and you're not thinking about anything specific, that is a kind of world, there is a kind of thinking, I think, going on, but it's just non-verbal. And it's very hard to talk about. Bohm speaks quite well about it in a clip where he speaks with Krishnamurti. I don't think Krishnamurti does so well, if I'm honest, but bless him, he holds up a very good dialogue space for Bohm to say some really brilliant things. And there's a quote where Bohm says, what is required here is not an explanation, but an act of understanding. And it's that act of understanding that I think happens in artworks, and also in lots of other things that people do, by the way. It's just I'm an artist, so it works artistically. Okay, and some of the orbs are not quite what you might expect. Obviously, I've got my hand in there, the kind of thinking that I just alluded to that comes with making, because something does sort of unfold when you're tactically involved. But I've got this one here called Preparing and Arranging Domestic Space. This is one of the tables. I'm really big into tables. And if you want to be close to me, you've got to use tables or I won't trust you. It's half a joke, but it's actually true. Because tables are like these mini platforms for thinking and making and doing. But that's also because I can't hold it in my head. So, this is a table where I do pieces of work that are definitely not about ideas. I don't usually photograph my workspace, but you know, when the light's just so amazing, and just like I might look at something I cherish and love or a person, sometimes when the light hits that desk, which is a place I get to spend some really wonderful time in at the end of the day, my heart just melts. And I think places and environments and the objects around us, and this is not, I don't mean it sentimentally, there's nothing on that table that someone gave me, or, you know, there's some, if the space isn't right, and I spend a lot of time with spaces and arranging them before I work in them, it's like one of those cogs starts turning and then lots of other cogs turn. So I love this space, and I'm making some, well, I won't talk about them. I don't want to talk about them here, but they're very lovely. And this is in my main studio. I love visual making. I love visual images, and it's a kind of visual thinking. I sometimes find it hard to do, and I love it. And sometimes I look at the mess and I go, why do you look more beautiful than my work? Why do you stimulate me more than my work? And it's a bit, Steve, when you were speaking yesterday about making the canvas, and that actually it's quite a lot of work, but that it's part of the painting. There's some kind of coded activity, the plasterer that Christopher Alexander talks about. One does it differently, one puts more time into it. We don't know what it is, but I think it's important. And if you're talking about process, you have to invite that in. And I also link it to extended mind. In the Holoflux group, Maria shared this amazing article of how a spider actually thinks and minds, not just through her apparatus as a creature, she does it through her web, through her environment. And I'm like, wow. And if we had time, I would tell you the most phenomenal story about me and a spider. I don't think we have time. These guys know it. So I got it in there, guys. I gave it a little mention. It's all in there. And then this quote, because something else that is one of those orbs is the creature, and that's me as a creature, and every one of you is a creature. And I like the word creature because it links to creativity. So think about those trainers and the trainers of transformation, and this ability we have to freely express. In most situations, we are all free to express. We don't. And there's lots of complicated social and cultural habits that no one should feel at fault for, but those things preventing us from doing it. In fact, the only way often for that not to operate is to become a recluse or to go to art school. You know, as a way, I mean, we have art students coming to art school. I don't think they want to become artists and painters. They just want to do this deal differently. and they want to open up their creaturely potential. And the creature, when a creature is engaged in creativity, in my case through art, for any one of you it could be a different thing, your own capacity is made back. And it's one of the things I love in Tim Ingold's book, Imagining for Real, which we discussed last week, because he speaks of how a doing is also an undergoing. And that undergoing, that affects me as a person, of course, but it's less that. And I actually think some ontological capacity within the creature is affected. And that's important. And so this quote somehow talks of that. And he talks about a direct perception, and I think it's possible, but I think it will come to you in a very strange way. But what my point is, and Bohm talks about the importance of the creature as well. He doesn't use that term. And it's one of always, he's so refreshing, because he's like an orrery, and he could make a goddamn orrery, let's face it, because he's also mathematical and scientist in a way that I wish I was, but I'm not. But he can talk about the particular creature as well, and how that is an important feature within that, without falling into the problems of subjectivity and sovereignty and ego. But I think that for whatever you're reading and your extended mind, you yourself as a creature are a contact point with the unknowable. And that doesn't mean you can know it, but if you don't somehow work with attentiveness, I mean, Sky, you've been talking about this beautifully too. It's really important, very hard to talk about. And as an artist, it's really uncool. And people think you're sort of talking about therapy. Actually, there's nothing wrong with therapy either, but I'm not trying to be personal. But I'm not going to take my creatureliness out of it. That's part of the big experiment that I think Bohm, and I think also Lee, I don't want to embarrass you, but you encourage us to experiment with ourselves first and foremost within the artistic medium of the larger reality. These are two little drawings that I wouldn't normally show. They're not I don't show a lot of work actually. I call these studio warm-ups. And they're little drawings. I have a little pad. And when I know I've got a stretch of time in the studio, I always start by trying to come to my own creaturely capacity. And where am I in my own formation? And I don't mean Hester Reeve and my personality. I mean, as a kind of weird, both physical and non-physical substance. I'm one location in space and time. And they're playful and I love doing them. They're part of me with a handle, touching that handle of the orrery. So for all the beautiful philosophy and exciting things I read, actually I have to come back to my own contact point with that. It's very humble. They're very humble little drawings. And they open up, and they mean the rest of the time will somehow work in the studio. And Tim Ingold referenced a beautiful essay by Molu Morris-Ponty last week. And that essay is called Cézanne's Doubt. And it's been a really important essay for me. And it's all beautiful. It's worth reading. You can download it easily online. But in talking about Cézanne, who does talk about thinking, Cézanne, like many of the best artists, will talk not about thoughts and knowledge, but about thinking. There's this beautiful thing where, although it is certain that a person's life does not explain his work, it is equally certain that the two are connected. The truth is that work to be done called for that life. And it's hard to talk about, but we need to talk about that. Like with, the person who ended with, I think it was Rob, talked about, we need to talk about imagining for real, which is the whole thing of Tim Ingold's incredible book. And then to end, I'll just show an image of a sort of piece of work that has been shown in a gallery. Yeah, I'll just show it first. It's called Will Stick number 1, because there are a few of them. And it's probably clear, but in case it's not, it's a paintbrush. And instead of using the paintbrush to paint with or make a painting, I've carved into it. It hadn't carved before. It was great, very, very enjoyable process. I think I was trying to stir something up. I talk a little bit about what that is, maybe. It's a carving of the tree of knowledge from the Garden of Eden. That's an apple there. It's a strange looking tree, but the form always is suggested by the materials. And it's tied up with a longing. I was so pleased Tim Ingold talked about the importance of that. It's an important word for me. I long for painting. I tell my students I'm a painter, and they get very confused because I don't take out oil paint and put it on canvas. Although I would say there is such a thing as expanded painting. And Steve, you talked about Stella, who's just pioneer in that area. And the problems I have with painting are not with painting itself a little bit. It can get exhausted, like Frank Stella said. Painting as an academic, as a cultural conversation can become exhausted. It's more about when I come back to the trainers of transformation and the problems facing the world because we haven't been imagining for real and because there's particular creatures we very rarely open up, which of course Bohm talks about and is all about the practice of dialogue, the process and practice of Bohm dialogue. And if a painting can't do that, and if I really care about that, and I really do, for the longest time I haven't been able to let myself paint. That's actually sort of changing. But anyway, that's another story. But so this is part of a ritual to get back to painting. But it's also talking about painting's ability to think and opening up what philosophy is. I suppose I would call it philosophizing for real, following Tim. And this is an art object, of course, but I see it more as a talisman. This idea that you might have a form that, whilst it links to what the wood would tell me it wanted and allowed me to do, it is very much linked to ideas and thinking and cogitations and all those things that go round in my head at 1,000,000 miles an hour and quite chaotic and quite all-consuming and quite confusing. And then just suddenly it's like the orrery stops and I go, oh my God, I have to carve a paintbrush. And talismans, they're very specific. They're very specific, but they relate to invisible energies. They're very skilled. They're often skill and craft is very important to me. And there's a tension between abstraction and figuration. And Bohm himself talks about the importance of free play between ideas and the mind, and that free play is very, very important before you come to empirical resolution. There's a close-up to the right of the apple. I love the way as a close-up it looks like genitalia. That's beautiful and that's wonderful given, well, the beauty of genitalia and also the Garden of Eden and the gorgeous way, the absolutely gorgeous way the snake approaches Eve. I'm not Christian, so I don't mean to offend a Christian, but the snake is amazing and wreathing with Kundalini energy. And he's asking her to speak. He's asking her to open up. And he's meddling. Satan, the meddler with reality. He's imagining for real. And it's only when you fix it through religion, of course, that you have a problem. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. And let's just read Blake because he does it so much better. So this piece of work, just a teeny bit of context, and I won't talk for much longer. It was part of a residency, which I'm so grateful for, by something called the Centre for Philosophy and Visual Art, based at King's College London. And for me, this was a dream. You had to apply and say why you wanted to study Immanuel Kant. You could also do another one, which was studying literature. And if I'm right, I was the only artist in the world who applied to study Immanuel Kant with the philosophers at King's College. And I studied with an amazing philosopher and just sat in on lectures and read the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. Having read a lot of philosophy, I'd never read Kant and saw him as a more empirical, I like Continental and Heidegger sort of stuff, and Deleuze and Guattari and all the people that are flowing and raving and going mad and holofluxing and all of that stuff, I wasn't expecting to be so amazed by Immanuel Kant. Well, he was an amazing thinker and philosopher, and you put that much time into a book, you're going to have a good time. But more what amazed me was that he was imagining. And philosophers don't like this. There are these odd things like his notion of a moral law, which actually he doesn't argue for in words and sort of logically. He sort of fathoms it imaginatively and then says, well, I'm sorry, but it's here now. And that goodwill is this thing inside a human being that is, we all have it as a creaturely capacity, but he then doesn't know how to liberate it. But it has to correspond somehow to moral law. And what he's trying to do is to put into words the orrery. In his case, it's an orrery of moral responsibility without it being didactic or based on knowledge. And when I read this, I just completely flipped and fell in love and all of that stuff. And I realized, oh my God, he's making conceptual sculpture. I mean, of course, I was going off on one. And actually, the philosopher I worked with was really open to that notion that he goes into this sort of imaginative free play. So anyway, the brush became a thing called the will stick, from the goodwill, the will that we need to find inside. And I hand painted a tile with the snake and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this is a self-portrait. And as part of the residency, I got a residency for 2 months in a gallery in a tiny village in northern Netherlands called a Kunsthaus, and I called it Kant in the Kunsthaus, self-portrait. And I'm really interested in canvas, paintbrushes, palettes, not quite stretching them and putting the oil paint on. But I made an apron and I made a kind of diagram of the Garden of Eden. And in this case, and I put the brush in and I put myself in as Eve, the artist, reading Immanuel Kant. And instead of the snake, I put in one of those huge, amazing telescopes that enables us to lock our senses with a much wider sensual reality, which itself is linked to non-sensual everything, holoflux. And when I had an opening for the show, I did a performance. Using my body and performance is very, very important to my practice. I should say that I haven't done it for a long time. I won't go into why. But that somebody was asking before about how the holoflux and the work with holoflux group might have affected our practice. And one of the big things that I wasn't expecting is that it comes back to the body as a kind of creature and instrument in the world. And a lot of my early performance would last for a day. And I would set out a framework, but the actual performance would unravel in time. And there's such, I don't know what for the audience, but for me, I was a living orrery. And yeah, quite incredible. And in this one, I'm really interested in toilet seats. And I linked them to the holy. And I got very interested in Milton's Paradise Lost, which is about the fall of grace. And it's beautiful the way Satan approached. He didn't mean this, but it's very sensual. The way Satan is loving Satan first, the snake first loves the flowers. It's not Eve, it's the flowers and the plants. Satan is amazed by the garden, and then he spots Eve. And Kant was very influenced in his notions of moral law by reading the poem. So I just love this free flow between philosophy and art. So I read out sections of Kant and sections of Milton through the toilet. I got 2 other people, a man and a woman, who were in love, to also work with clay. And then I did this thing where I was the snake. So I became Satan, the artist, as the meddler in reality, and the paintbrush became my sort of tongue. And I put those in really because live art, but less, this was more like in an opening, it was a performance, but I've done performances that have lasted months. And I think I'll be going back into those works. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hester. In your creatureliness, you are a force of nature, truly. And because of COVID and so many other things, we've not yet ever had a chance to be together in the same physical space. And I really look forward to the time when that can happen. So let's keep going here. If you will, Steve, if you have thoughts or queries for Hester.
Wow, what a wonderful presentation. And so many questions and so little time. I guess I'm going to go back to the mechanical solar system, the solar system or the universe working as a machine kind of thing, which that was illustrating, and yet you were putting, very personal things to those orbs. And I was thinking about Bohm in terms of, he's talking about fragmentation and how to end fragmentation through, well, if you look at signa, soma, soma, signa, and meaning. And he says, if we can reorganize, redevelop our thoughts in terms of meaning, we would change our overall situation. And that the basic problem in the world is the way that we are creating the meaning. And what we have to do is change the meaning in order to change our being. And I was thinking of, you had one of the orbs as yourself. Was it yourself or some aspect of yourself? And how do you look at, if you would change one, change that orb, change its meaning, how the entire system would change?
Oh, lovely. Thank you. It's a great thing you bring in there and so clear. First, a lot of those orbs are ones I try and name. Also, the orbs are things I don't even understand as well. There are those as well. I'm not trying to totally anthropomorphize that thing. I think you know that, but I just want to make that clear. And that's why I said that the meaning is everywhere. And I think the change is in getting all of those things moving together, which doesn't mean sitting down and having a diagram and going, right, now I've got to, rotate this and then pull that lever. Although the model is mechanical, it's not, it's not mechanical. So ironically, sometimes it comes back, it's about having the movement. And it makes me realize, we all know about Bohm and his whole new metaphysical model. When he comes up with hollow flux and hollow movement, he's saying we do have models and we can't get away with models, just like we use language, but we don't allow this larger movement through them. And actually coming up with a religious model or that, we can respect that, but that only makes it worse because the movement isn't some overarching governing system. It's actually a movement through of something that's completely unknowable. And at the same time, whilst it's unknowable, and there's no point even trying to know it because that's just incommensurate, that doesn't mean there isn't work to be done. That's the trainers of transformation. I don't quite know though. Bohm dialogue, not that it usually manages to really do that, but that's because we're all creatures who've been formed by this system we live in. But Bohm dialogue for me is a place where there is an attempt. And what I love about that is it's not trying to, in a loud hailer, like, every city and every world do it now, and then we might just change things. It's on the doorstep. It's like with the people you're with, or, and because I truly do think it's transformative, when and how it works, which is also a bit of an orrery, but so it's the movement. And in my case as an artist, and I'm quite a complicated person, it might be quite obvious. So I need that whole orrery system and to become super intense and to think about my brain as this bud of the universe. That makes me feel like I belong and I can go downstairs and cook dinner. That's my form of movement. For someone else, It can be the way they garden. It can be the way, I know people like that, the way they are with plants and gardening, right? Who probably looked at me talking about the orrery and go, oh, I get that. I wouldn't have those things. And when they're gardening, other stuff is also happening. And but it's also, and this is the hardest thing, it is about us as creatures not being, and Tim, I mean, I was blown away. It's sort of in the book, but Tim talked about that so eloquently last week. So we are somehow, there is work. We have to do work is even the wrong noise and wrong word. And sometimes maybe we have to give it to one another. Maybe I can never be free, but you can help me be free. You know, we help one another be free in the art of existence. Yes, we have to, I'm not saying we should go around dancing, singing the art of freedom the whole time, you know, but I actually think cleaning up the shit is the art of freedom, personally. Sorry, it's part of the art of freedom, but not if it's done under a repressive regime. So sorry, I don't know if I've made any sense, but it's the movement, and that's why I put meaning everywhere, but not human meaning. I mean, the movement of meaning. And within that, we might have our own forms of meaning, and every now and then it becomes a plant we're tending, a baby we're looking after, the way Aja works with her garden, you're painting, and Sky's beautiful sculpture.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hester. Thank you, Steve. Sky, do you have some comments?
Yes, you're talking about me, Hester, but in fact, you're also an extraordinary creature. You're going all directions. Sometimes it's hard to follow. I just a quick thought. I think you're right that you can't really blot out thinking. It's always present, and for example, in painting, even in the Asian tradition of, well, really becoming one with the subject and putting in on canvas or on paper. I think, yeah, somehow I saw this when I was seeing some of Klimt's work and others. The metaphysics always come through in some kind of way. And this might be trivial, but the question I'm having is, what's holy about the toilet seat?
Perfect. Because defecation is fantastic and very important, and that's one thing. It reminds me of the female pelvis, which never ceases to astonish me. I have one under a blanket behind me. It's a skeleton. I think the male pelvis too, by the way. But I am, even though I haven't had a child myself, I just find it incredible that life is generative. And the pelvis. And they're beautiful. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just, I think toilet seats are underrated. That's quite a cheap one as well, but it's like, it's really quite beautiful as a thing. I sometimes wear it around my neck. And I'm sorry, that's my answer. Oh, it's great. I have my soulmate with me at the moment from New York, and I can hear her laughing downstairs. That's fellow partner in toilet seats.
Oh.
Thank you, Hester. Thank you, Sky. Aja, do you have any comments or a question for Hester?
Yes, I have way too many comments and questions, but I just kind of can't help but bringing out a reflection. And you talked about participation and something of the whole in each of us, and that being disturbing. And then when you showed really yourself as this solar system, the sun and the planets moving around you and this access into the unknowable, I couldn't help but return to what Lee brought out about the sun, the field of the sun really being the whole solar system, and the earth being inside the sun, us being inside the earth or a cell of the earth, but then we're also a cell of the sun And then here you are as a sun with the spinning and the movement, and really kind of feeling that just made me nauseous, actually. All the spinning, the beautiful disturbance of that. And so I know we're short on time, but I at least wanted to just bring that out. And then it's also in the wheel stick and in the toilet seat, but can just feel it strongly. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And just one thing that the orbs are just, is, sort of quasi-metaphorical, but through the work in the Holoflux group and my own work with Rio Soma and my body and being in all of this, the sun has become, and light, the most astonishing, extraordinary thing. So within that, I should really have an actual sun, because that's affected my studio practice. Not that I make work about the sun. So yeah, and thank you. Your own creaturely contact point is where those words come from. So it's really powerful what you said. It's even lovelier that they were said in relationship to the talk. That's just lovely, isn't it, on a more pedestrian level? But what you said, Aja, there comes from that creature capacity turning point. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Hester. Thank you, Aja. James, do we have any participants who would like to join us?
I'm sure we do. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Hester. As always, your presentations are so wonderful and so full of energy and spirit. I have opened the chat, so feel free to use it for our audience. And of course, if you want to make a contribution or ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function. Don't see yet. Let's see.
If we're waiting, I'll just make one comment for Hester, just very briefly. Going all the way back to the beginning, Hester, with the trainers. Is that the right?
Yeah, sure.
The trainers, right. So it may not have been exactly or directly part of your intention, I don't know, but one of the feelings I got, and by the way, that image of the trainers, the first image, is carried for me all the way through your presentation. And part of it was about walking and about moving, which of course links us back to Tim. The shoes with feet and shoes on the earth. And it's that earth thing that moved me so much, that we, in many ways, rightly think of the earth as solid and stable. But in fact, the earth is profoundly moving at its deepest levels, and we know that plates are moving, and the same energies, the energy of radioactivity that's coming from stars, albeit in a different form, is causing those convection currents that are causing the plates on the surface of the earth to move. So there's this fire energy deep in the earth, and when I saw the trainers with that light coming out of them, there was such an immediate feeling of the fire of earth within us and rising up through us. So I wanted to thank you for that. It's just very beautiful and potent. But back to James, do we have someone with us?
We do, yes. Let's go to Dave first.
I'm unmuted. Hester, delightful. What a delight. So wonderful. First, a quick comment, and then, a question. You mentioned Heidegger saying, "Why is there something rather than nothing?" And that struck me because it occurs to me when we really examine all our somethings, the whole structure of consciousness is an imagination. And then it gets turned around. Why is there nothing rather than something? So I kind of like that. I mean, it's something to go into. For you, you said, I'll quote you as I wrote it down anyhow, you're a contact point with the unknowable, but I am not going to leave out my creatureliness. I mean, that's so lovely, so lovely. Can you say something holding in one hand the unknowable and the other your creatureliness? Just to, I'd like to just hear you express your feelings on that, or your thoughts, or the way it, you know, your own statement moves you, because it really moved me.
That's the kind of thing that I can only, you know, you say that, my only thing is like, I'm going to get the handle, I'm going to move the orrery, I'm going to slowly walk in my trainers of transformation. I think the word, the creature thing is really important, and has really helped me when, like, words do help, when they help clarify in a good way rather than limit and fix and set up a difficult system of information, then words can help. And the creature thing matters because it's both physical of the earth, you know, we are from the earth, we're terra genus, but it has the sense of a fable as well. We talk in fairy tales of the creature came out of its lair. And I quite like that both of those are combined together, because they are, in the way that Tim talked about imagining for real. The unknowable and the unknown is hard to talk about because those words get bandied around so much. And I understand why, and I've used them quite a few times. But I kind of have this sense that in the actual organicness of the creatureliness, that is the contact point with the unknown. But it's not a contact that means, here's the door, I can access it now, or that I have to go and do yoga in a very special way with a rubber nose on, and then I'll come up with, I'll be closer to the holoflux or something. So I don't actually know if I'm answering your question. I just think what you've done is orb with me, Dave. You've orbed with me in the orrery, and that tension, that thing you bring in is just spot on. And I can't say anything really.
Yeah, what you stirred in me is by bringing those two together now, just in what you're saying, is the sense of the creature as creation,
Yes.
and as a vehicle of not just the individual little creation, but as the whole of the whole. So you're kind of bringing me into a sense of the whole and its particular expression by listening to you. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like, yeah, that makes so much, I don't want to say that makes sense. You know what I mean? Thank you.
I know what you mean. It makes heart.
Yes.
Thank you, Hester. Thank you, David. James, I think we have time for one more question or comment.
Sure, we do. We'll have Kathleen next.
Hi, Hester, that was really great. Thank you so much. I actually want to go back to the question, a comment you made yesterday, which is the importance of attention to existence itself. And my notion of that is human being as existence. So we exist as existence. And I wonder if you could comment on this with both, in both the context of the holoflux and Kant's concept of aesthetic. And I know that's a big question, but I'll just leave it with you.
Wow. Well, of course, I mean, I'm not a Kant expert, but I had to reread Kant's work on the aesthetic. And I became really taken by his notion of the aesthetic idea, and was like, oh my God, there's so much discussion around his aesthetics, and how Tim Ingold talks about it in the book, about how he makes aesthetics empirical, and he gives it over to be in terms of the viewer and in the object rather of a larger thing. But when Kant talks about the aesthetic idea, I actually feel it comes back into the realm I know it's linked to the genius and that's a problematic word, but it comes back into this realm of the creature of creation managing to let something else in. Now so the creature is in existence, and I'm not going to get very good at answering this beautiful question, but you're making me think that I didn't say it enough, that the word creature does allow us to talk about that attention to existence. The very word seems to suggest something touching, both with its body, but also mind tentacles, extended mind, the ground. And I suppose the holoflux is like an aesthetic idea. I mean, I'm wondering if that's part of what you're suggesting there. Because the holoflux, just like I was just getting off on Kant and the way he comes up with this sort of conceptual sculpture, I'll call it, because it's a model, but it's not. Models tend to work, and we know what they do. It's not quite accepted as a model that works, but yet it does something. Without that, I don't think his work would move something. And I think for me, it really moved some sort of thing. And I think because we can't know the holoflux itself is like an aesthetic idea, but that by creaturely responding to that as an idea, rather than information or knowledge or a rule, we are corresponding somehow to that. And in that correspondence within us, we are at least in an horary sort of movement with holoflux. But for me, we are of holoflux, but none of which I can speak because does that make sense?
Well, it does to me, because I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's a dynamic, I would use the word paradigm, like it's a dynamic paradigm. And so we're sourcing, witnessing, and moving all simultaneously. We receive, we give, we receive. It's a constant movement. And I understand that through the work that I do in my own work, which is in the realm of human development. And so it's not a model. There is no formula. And yet there is a constant and forever movement, which actually gives us access if we get out of our head and into our bodies.
Yes, that's absolutely it. And the thing that's so profound about what you say, and it sort of links to work we've been doing with Rio Soma, is we actually in the West have cultures of be in the body, be in the body, get in the body. And that's not a bad thing, but ironically, it doesn't actually allow us to get in the body.
No, because it eliminates resonance.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's really insightful and really important. And on one hand, here we are with our bodies. And then you think, oh, I've taken it for granted that I have contact with my body. And then you realize, of course I don't. It's been quashed by lots of things. But the beauty is, and we talked about this in the thing with Tim, actually it's all there. And I actually think sometimes it can be opened remarkably quickly. But again, it's difficult because you can't make a rule of it, because then it dies again. So it comes back to what happens on our doorsteps. Mm-hmm. And how we might arrange our food tonight, how we are with one another here in this very particular locale of this space. And I used to feel a bit pathetic about that. Oh, but there's so many, and there really are problems with humans and the planet. But actually,
want to talk to Sally for a few minutes?
Hester, it can't actually start anywhere else.
It can't start anywhere but with the individual.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hester and Kathleen. I think it's a very, very potent place for us to close these 2 days, which is bringing everything back to the doorstep, as you've put it, Hester. I think that really puts us in the right place. So thank you, Hester, for so much of what you brought out today. And thank you, Sky, for sharing yourself and everything that you brought out today. Thank you, Asia, for everything that you shared of your work and what you brought yesterday. And thank you, Steve, for a remarkable exposition about the nature of your work and how that intersects with David Bohm. Thank you all for being with us for 2 really rich, full days. The arc of this will stay with me forever, truly. There's so much to take in and digest. I just really want to express gratitude to the 4 of you. And of course, gratitude to the Pari Center, to James and Eleanor, and gratitude to everyone who has joined us and stayed with us and participated in our feast over the past couple of days. So with that, James, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Lee. And really, what an incredible weekend we've all had together. I mean, all the presentations were phenomenal. Aja, Steve, Sky, and Hester really were thought-provoking. And I mean, yeah, this is definitely a recording to rewatch. It's really been incredible. And of course, thank you so much, Lee, for not only organizing this, but also for moderating and being present throughout this weekend. It's really been valuable. And of course, to all of us who have joined through your contributions, through your questions, chat, or even just sitting there and listening to us. It's really been great. Before we go, I'd just like to invite you all to next weekend, which is the final weekend of this first section of Beyond Bohm. On Saturday, the overarching theme will be dialogue. On Saturday, we will talk about dialogue in the age of Zoom, where we'll be joined by Julie Arts, Richard Berg, Anna Factor, Sally Jeffrey, Beth Macy, Lee again, and Dave Schramm. On Sunday, as a sort of a closing session, we will be joined by Leroy Littlebear, Jeanette Armstrong, Greg Cajete, Amethyst First Rider, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Melissa Nelson, John Briggs, Harvey Locke, and Lee Nicol, where it will be a hosting of the Indigenous Dialogue with the theme Walk in Beauty. So I really hope you'll join for that weekend. In the meantime, if you want to contact us, you can use our website or email eleanor@paricenter.com. Thank you all again. We'll see you again soon here at the Pari Center.